Have you ever wondered if heaven really is what the churches say it is? What if the truth is very different and much more liberating? In today's video, learn about the story of Sarah Mitchell, a faithful Christian who died for 9 minutes and came back with a shocking revelation. Heaven is not what you were taught. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below which city you are watching to strengthen this community of truth seekers. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I am 42 years old, and I am from Texas, USA. I grew up in a traditional Christian community, the kind where the Bible is instilled in you from birth. I was taught that heaven was a place for the obedient, for those who followed the rules, fasted, prayed, and avoided the world. I believed this with all my soul. I dedicated my life to the church. I was a Sunday school teacher. I organized retreats. I did everything right. But nothing prepared me for the day my heart stopped and I discovered that most of what I had been taught was a lie. It was an ordinary morning. I was preparing breakfast when I felt an intense pain in my chest. I thought it was anxiety, stress, but it was a silent heart attack. 911 was called. Everything was blurry, distant voices, and then silence, the kind of silence that screams. When my eyes closed, doctors said my heart had stopped for almost 9 minutes. But what happened during those minutes has left a lasting impression on me. I floated out of my body. I found myself lying there surrounded by machines, crying in despair. And yet, I was okay. There was no pain. There was no fear. Just a sense that something big was about to happen. And I was right. What you hear now may shake everything you believe, but I promise, it's the most freeing truth I've ever felt. The first thing I felt was lightness, like someone took a ton from me. I no longer had a body, but I had consciousness. And there was something different there, like everything was more alive than life itself. I was enveloped by a kind of luminous fog, but it wasn't a light that hurt the eyes. It was hot. It was alive. I didn't walk. I didn't even float. It was like being carried by an intention, as if the very space around me knew who I was, where I should go. And then I saw something that took me by surprise. There were no golden gates, choirs of angels, or the scenes that were shown to me so many times in preaching. I hoped to find that textbook heaven that I learned about since I was a child. But what surrounded me was much deeper and more disconcerting. The place seemed made of consciousness. Every color, every sound, every vibration, everything communicated something. And I understood everything without anyone having to say it. It was as if my soul, for the first time, was free to hear what it had always tried to remember. It was then that I felt a presence behind me. It wasn't scary. On the contrary, it was like meeting someone you've never met, but feel like you've always known. When I turned around, I didn't see a human face. It was a form made of light, but with personality, with emotional density. And me, he spoke, not with words, but straight inside me. You're not here by chance, and what you believed about this place needs to be revised. It pierced me like an invisible knife. My mind immediately recalled verses, sermons, images of judgment, books being opened, angels writing down works. But none of that was there. The presence continued, with a calm that disconcerted me. You sought God sincerely, but you were taught to fear Him more than to love Him. You were trained to obey, but not to surrender. At that moment, I began to cry. Tears that did not wet my face but flowed down into my soul. It was as if all my devotion, all my effort, all my fear of making mistakes were being seen for the first time with mercy, not with judgment. And then the revelation came with more force. Heaven is not the prize of the righteous, it is the home of children, and many children are lost within the churches. That shook me inside. I wanted to scream. I wanted to deny it. But you knew that was true. I felt that truth within every particle of who I was at that moment. Everything they taught me, was partially right. But it was also deeply incomplete. I was there, alive, conscious, loved. But heaven wasn't what they told me. When that presence of light moved away, something changed around me. The environment seemed to breathe with me. With every thought that arose in me, the space around me responded. Not with words, but with vibrations, colors, pulsations. I began to realize that heaven, or what I thought was heaven, was not a place, but a state of consciousness, a living field where what we are is completely revealed. And then came a truth that tore me apart inside. Nothing can be hidden there. No mask, no religion, no disguised intention. I saw parts of myself, parts I hid even from myself. My rigidity, my judgment, the pride that masqueraded as zeal, the fear I called faith. And yet, I was not rejected. I felt as if a much greater intelligence, which I would call God but which didn't need a name, surrounded me like an ocean. An ocean that does not drown but reveals. A love that doesn't negotiate with your performance, that does not require posture, speech, holiness. He just see you, and love. Even so, especially like this. It was at that moment that I heard other voices, many. But they did not come from outside. They came from inside me. They were like echoes of all the sermons, songs, advice, and warnings I had heard in my life. You have to earn it. God only loves the saints. Do not question the doctrine. Obey. Be strong. Be perfect. These phrases swirled around me like thorns, but now in that state, I saw each one for what it was. Human conditioning. Trying to capture a love that never fit into rules. And then, like a snap, I understood. The churches did not lie out of malice, but out of fear of losing control, fear of a God who is so free, so loving that it scares, because this love does not accept cages. It breaks with all attempts at manipulation. At that moment, a kind of veil tore before me. I saw thousands of people sitting in temples, each one trapped in some kind of invisible prison. Guilt, doctrine, fear of hell, spiritual pride. I saw preachers speaking of a God they themselves feared to truly know. I saw people burning themselves out trying to reach heaven without knowing that heaven already lived within them. It was overwhelming and liberating. There I knew. Heaven is not a place you arrive at. It's the place you remember you've always been when you stop pretending to be something you never were. After that crushing revelation, I was led, I don't know how or by whom, into a new space. It was as if I was being pulled without resistance, taken to a place where something even deeper needed to happen. The environment has changed. The light around became more golden, more intense. But she wasn't aggressive. It was like being inside a living song, a melody made of silence and feeling. And then, I saw them. 3 beings, tall, translucent, surrounded by a pulsing light that seemed to come from within them. They had no faces, but I knew they were conscious. They were ancient, and they knew me. They communicated like the previous presence, straight to the soul, without words, and what they said broke me apart inside. You were trained to follow, but now you are being called to remember. Remember? I wondered what that meant. And before I could think any further, they showed me something I will never forget. A field, not a physical field. It was like a network of lights, with billions of interconnected wires. And I saw people, but not as bodies. They were consciousnesses, each one vibrating at a different frequency. Some were denser, others were so light they looked like sparks. This is humanity, they said, and see how many are trapped in ideas that take them away from the essence. And that's when it happened. They began to show the effects of institutionalized religion on these consciences. I saw people being crushed by spiritual weight. Others vibrated with fear. Some were so wrapped up in rules, doctrines, and absolute truths that they could no longer hear the call of their soul. And then came the phrase that still echoes within me today. The biggest mistake is not denying God. It is believing that He only reveals Himself through religion. I felt small in the face of that. All my life I had defended doctrines like someone protecting a safe. But now, there, in the face of this greater intelligence, I understood God's love has never fit into systems. It is beyond language, beyond denominations, beyond the limits we impose. One of the beings approached. I didn't see a mouth, but he smiled with the soul. The church taught the map, but it forgot the destination. Heaven is not a place of reward. It is a place of origin. I cried again, tears of recognition, because deep down somewhere inside me I already knew this. But I had to die, to remember. They looked at me tenderly. You will see even more, and you will understand why so many were deceived with good intentions. And then I was carried on. Crossing that golden space, I was taken to an environment that completely disconcerted me. It was like a large circular room made of light, but with a different density. Inside, there was a heavy silence, a silence of respect, but also of pain. In the center was something that looked like a mirror, but it didn't reflect the body, but the soul. As I approached, I saw reflections of people, hundreds, thousands, faces of all ages, colors, cultures, and they all had one thing in common. They had tried to show the world the true essence of God and were silenced. The presence of one of the previous beings was with me, and he explained to me without using words, just with the force of thought and sensation. These are the forgotten ones, those who did not follow the dogmas, who dared to speak of love without rules, of salvation without fear, of spirituality without religion. I saw women burned like witches for talking about inner healing. I saw men rejected by churches for saying that God's love was not exclusive. I saw young people branded rebellious for listening to their intuition instead of the pastor. Each face told a story of trial and punishment. And then he added, "You are one of them." I froze. Because throughout my life, I kept quiet. Even when I felt inside that there was something wrong with the speeches, that the obsession with purity, holiness, performance, and punishment did not reflect the God that my soul intuited, I kept quiet, out of fear, out of obedience, out of wanting to please. But now I saw, true heaven never punishes sincere doubt. It welcomes. It listens. It answers. The being took me to a sort of library made of floating lights. Each light was a memory of humanity, and he showed me how many true revelations had been diluted, adapted, or simply erased from history in order to maintain control. The church lied, not always with malice, but with attachment to structure, to power, to fear. Eddie, that moment, everything made sense. Why some questions were never answered in services? Why did spirituality always come with so much weight? Why did divine love always seem to be conditioned on something? I saw religion as a frame that over time forgot about painting. The picture was God. The frame became the center. And then I heard something I will never forget. A voice like a soft trumpet echoing within me. The time of fear is ending. The children are returning to the Father and without intermediaries. In that room among the forgotten and the silent, I felt that the truth was returning, and that my experience was part of that. If I could choose one moment that turned everything around inside me, it was this one. Because until then, even in the face of everything I had seen, I still carried an ancestral fear. That fear ingrained in my every cell by years of sermons about the Judgment Day. But what came next simply destroyed this idea. I was led to a new space, There were no walls, no ceiling. It was a field of infinite light where time seemed to bend in reverence, and in front of me, there appeared what I instinctively identified as the throne of God. Only there was no throne like I had imagined. There was no lightning, no thunder, no stern old man with a judgmental gaze. There was just a presence, so vast, so silent, so loving, that it completely dismantled me. At the time, my soul shook, because I was conditioned waiting for the condemnation, the display of my sins, the voice telling me everything I had done wrong. And in that instant, I relived flashes of my life, not as a movie, but as feelings. Moments when I judged, moments when I doubted, moments when I sinned in thought, in word, in intention. I fell to my knees, or rather, I felt gave me away. There was no pretending there, and then nothing happened. Nothing. There was no trial. Instead, I was enveloped in a love that went through me like fire. A fire that doesn't burn but purifies. I felt as if every mistake I had was understood at its source, and for the first time, I realized something I had never been told in church. God didn't judge me, He understood me. I heard, inside my soul, "You suffered trying to please me, when all I wanted was for you to know me." That sentence tore me apart, because it was true. I had dedicated my life to following rules, to fearing sin, to deserving heaven. But there, in that presence, you knew, heaven is not worthy. Heaven remembers. Heaven is a living reminder of who we have always been, part of Him. And then, a new truth was revealed. The trial is not a court, it is a mirror. In that place, I realized that the greatest judge is the light itself. She doesn't accuse, she reveals. And when faced with the truth, you either open up or remain trapped in your masks. I chose to open up. And at that moment, I felt like my entire soul was undressed. That every layer of religiosity, moralism, fear, and pride dissolved. And instead of that, something appeared that I can't even explain. A peace that was not the absence of pain, but fullness. A joy that was not laughter, but freedom. You have seen what you needed to see. Now there is more to be shown. And I was carried forward. I was feeling lighter, cleaner, but something inside me still ached. A question burned inside, my soul like hidden embers. What about the churches? What about everything they taught me? Why did they show us heaven like this? As if reading my thoughts, and there, it was exactly that. The presence that accompanied me enveloped me again and said, "Come, you need to see for yourself." In an instant, everything around me changed. I was on Earth, literally above the planet, as if hovering in a parallel dimension. But what I saw was not the physical world. It was what was behind His, what the eyes do not capture, but the soul feels. I started to see churches, of all types, small, giant, historic, modern, Catholics, evangelicals, Pentecostals, Orthodox, Mormons, witnesses, even lesser-known cults. It was like looking at a spiritual map of the religious world. And then, the shock. Every church had a light, but not every light was clean. Some shone with genuine love, but others were covered in a dark haze, a smoke that did not come from sin, as we were taught, but from fear, control, and pride disguised as truth. I saw pastors shouting from the pulpit, but inside they were filled with guilt. I saw priests repeating rituals without even feeling what they were saying. I saw tired religious leaders, trapped in their own structures, teaching a God that they themselves no longer found. I saw members consuming themselves trying to be worthy of a heaven that cannot be conquered. That's when I felt something I never expected to feel. God's pain. Not a pain of anger, not out of anger, but a silent sadness, like the pain of a Father who sees his children playing hide and seek and from himself. I heard inside me. They sought me out, but they put me in a box. And now, they teach others to bow to the box, instead of finding me within themselves. That sentence was a punch. I saw doctrines becoming bars. I saw dogmas becoming chains. I saw salvation being negotiated, as if it were a prize for those who behave well and not a gift for those who surrender. And then came the harshest revelation. The lie is not saying that heaven exists. It is saying that it only accepts the righteous. At that moment I cried, a cry so deep that it seemed to come from previous lives, because I had been one of those people. I had upheld rules. I had looked askance at those who thought differently. I had preached a conditional God, and now I saw it. Heaven does not exclude. Religion does. And in the heart of that divine pain, there was a plea. Come back, but come back to me, not to the temples, to me. I was a wreck, and yet I felt loved. The truth hurts, but it also frees. I thought I had seen it all. Nothing could surprise me more. But there, in that dimension where everything is raw truth, the deception shows itself clearly, and it doesn't look ugly. I was taken to a place that seemed between worlds, neither light nor shadow, a dense space, as if made of intentions. And there, I saw him, the spirit of deception, but not as a grotesque demon or terrifying creature as I was taught. On the contrary, it was beautiful, impeccable, elegant, with an aura of authority and holiness. That was the scariest thing. He looked like a leader, someone you could trust. And then I felt, because there you don't think logically, you feel with your soul. This being walked between temples, pulpits, theological libraries, religious assemblies, and what he did was subtle, twisted the truth just a little, just enough to seem biblical, but carry fear, just enough to seem wise but arresting. I heard your words. They need to feel like they have to please me. The harder they try, the less they realize they are already loved. It was a punch, and then came another. If I make them believe that salvation depends on effort, they will never seek relationship. I trembled, because this was my story. And then Jesus appeared, not as I imagined, not in blinding light or on a throne, but as a serene, steady presence that radiated truth. He didn't scream. Don't confront in anger. Just look to the spirit of deception. And that look was enough. The being retreated. And Jesus turned to me. Communication was soul to soul, voiceless, but clear as fire. This is the greatest danger, deception that seems like virtue, zeal without love, holiness without compassion, faith that imprisons. I burst into tears. Because I understood that the true enemy of the soul, it is not the visible sin, but the spiritual lie that appears as light. And this lie is on many altars. He continued, They preach my name, but they do not know my essence. They talk about me, but they do not speak to me. They turned my embrace into a threat, my calling into doctrine. And then came the final revelation of that moment. The greatest theft of the enemy was to make my children fear me more than they desire me. My spiritual legs gave out. I felt broken, but also free. The truth was naked. Heaven is the home of love, not from religion. And there, between the false glow and the true light, I finally saw the difference. After all I've seen, the forgotten, the judgment that didn't come, the spirit of deception, I needed to know. If all. That was distortion. Where was the real sky? Jesus did not answer with words. He just reached out his hand, and when I touched it, we were transported. What I saw, there is no translation, but I'll try. It was a place where light seemed to breathe, a field of living vibration where Every particle sang a note of love. There were no streets of gold, no thrones, no hierarchies. There were no leaders, no followers. There were no titles. There was only free, transparent, and interconnected consciences for something I can only call absolute emotional truth. There no one hid anything, not because they were perfect, Michael, but because there was no longer any fear of being seen. And then, I saw faces. Faces of all religions. People with turbans, veils, cross necklaces, light and dark skin. People who had never been to church. People who dogmas said wouldn't enter. And everyone there glowed. I got confused. But they did not believe as I believed, I thought, and Jesus answered within me. They loved, they sought, they gave themselves. Some without naming my name, but living my spirit. That was like lightning. Because I always heard that only the saved would enter. That only those who confessed Jesus as the only Savior would inherit heaven. But there, before him, I realized love recognizes its children even if they call it by another name. Jesus then showed me something else. Circles. Soul circles. Each soul belonged to a learning circle, like spiritual families. They were groups that met again and again in different lives to heal, forgive, grow. I saw reconciliation meetings taking place there, hugs that lasted centuries, tears that washed away old memories, souls recognizing each other after so long separated by pain, and a truth exploded inside me. Heaven is not a court. It is a school of love. It's not a prize, it's a return. It is not a conquest, it is an origin. I also saw children, pure spirits. I saw souls that were never born. I saw animals. Yes, I felt presences that carried the same vibration as the pets. I loved in life, there was no separation. All there it was love vibrating in different forms. And the last thing Jesus showed me was a wall that dissolved as I approached. Behind her there were other realities, other skies, other levels of consciousness that I wasn't ready to see even there. He looked at me and said, not with voice, but with essence, this is heaven. And yet, it's just the beginning. I wanted to stay. I wanted to never leave. But deep down, I already knew it was time to go back. I didn't want to leave that place, not at all. Being there was like finally remembering who I always was, as if everything I experienced on earth was just a long amnesia. And in that sacred space, I had finally awakened. Jesus looked at me with a sweetness that does not exist on earth, a sweetness that doesn't judge, doesn't pressure, doesn't demand, just or. And he said to me, again, without words, but with that communication that passes through the Spirit, you will come back, not to continue as before, but to remember who you are, and help others remember too. My being revolted, inside. I wanted to stay, this was home. There, finally, there were no walls, rules, fear, masks. There, I was just soul, and that was enough. But he showed me something that changed everything. A view of Earth. Not as it is, but as it can be. I saw people waking up. I saw walls falling. I saw churches transforming into points of light, not of control, but of healing. I saw men and women who were once controlling leaders now becoming facilitators of reconnection. I saw children teaching adults how to get back to love. I have seen atheists who loved with more purity than many religious people. I saw the sky, born inside people. And then, he handed me something that seemed to be made of pure light, a seed. Plant this. I understood. It was not a mission to preach, convert, convince. It was to remember, to inspire, to open spaces so that others could also encounter this truth. Heaven begins within. Love is the only criterion, and God was never far away. At that moment, I began to feel a force pulling me. A different warmth, a weight returning. His presence grew more distant but never completely disappeared. He was with me, inside, as if he had left a part of himself in me. And then I came back. I returned to my body, to the world, to time. But everything was different. I can't talk about it with people like I used to. You can't put heaven in human words, but I can feel it. I can look at someone and see the soul beyond the shell. I can live without fear. I can love without conditions. And that's why I'm here, telling you all about it. If you've come this far, perhaps this message is for you too. Maybe you, like me, have felt that there is something wrong with this path of faith full of rules and fear. Maybe your soul is asking to remember. If so, close your eyes. Feel it. You've been there too, you just forgot. But now, it's time to remember. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.